Hello and welcome to The Huddle, the college football podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. We're talking about the main slate, the early slate on FanDuel and DraftKings for Saturday. Starting things off with the signal callers, the quarterbacks, Malik Zaire, I believe it's said. I'm not completely sure, so maybe we'll double check on that one. But he had a huge game against Texas last week in that dominant performance. Now he gets a matchup against Virginia here. So why don't you give me your take on him tonight or this week, I should say?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty similar matchup against Texas last week against Virginia this week. Granted, he's on the road this time around, but it shouldn't make much of a difference. 313 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns last week against the Longhorns, and he didn't even really run the ball, which is kind of scary that he's putting up 25 plus fantasy points without even really gaining anything on the ground. If you remember from last year in that bowl game, he ran for 96 yards and a touchdown against LSU, so definitely capable of putting up some fantasy points on the ground as well. And his price is really good compared to the other top-tier options. You have 8,300 on FanDuel, not a bad salary there. And I love his price tag at DraftKings, 7,300, where he's considerably cheaper than these other guys that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So a nice value play with some big upside there. Greg Ward Jr. next, $8,000 on FanDuel, $7,900 on DraftKings. Used to be a wide receiver, now he's a quarterback. You mentioned here he's a do-it-all kind of quarterback that can he can run, he can throw, and this is a tougher matchup for him, but I think you still like him quite a bit in this one.
Yeah, definitely, and most of it has to do with his running capabilities. He can just scramble. He can throw the ball. He can do everything. And Houston, they're 14-point underdogs this week at Louisville, so they're going to need him. They're going to rely on him heavily to make some plays to stay in this game. And if you look at the numbers last season, Louisville had a really good defense, but they lost 11 starters on that defense. So you saw it last week. Gave up 31 points to Auburn. So definitely some work to be done on the defensive side of the ball for Louisville. So I'm not that scared of the matchup, considering that Ward will definitely have the supply, both running and passing in this game. So I like his dual threat capability for about $8K on FanDuel, $7.9K on DraftKings.
Yeah, and on the opposite side of this same exact game, Lamar Jackson, much cheaper though, $5,800 on FanDuel, $61 on DraftKings. Had a nice debut. Did a lot of the running that we mentioned that some of these other guys hadn't been doing the first week. So nice value play here for him against Houston.
Yeah, and the train of thought with this is that, he had 16 carries, 106 yards last week against Auburn. And Auburn is a pretty decent defense. SEC defense, pretty stout, at least a lot better than Houston, his matchup for this weekend. So, if you just put 2 and 2 together, add in the value that he's only $5,800 on FanDuel, $6,100 on DraftKings, it looks like a pretty solid play. Essentially, I mentioned this in the write-up that you're looking to get most of his production from the ground game, and then anything else he gets in the passing game is just, gravy on top of that. So maybe if he gets a passing touchdown, play action, someone's wide open streaking down the field, that just adds to his fantasy total.
Yeah, certainly a low-risk type of guy at that price with some upside. So moving on now to running backs, where we've got Alex Collins from Arkansas. We know Arkansas for years now been a school that's been producing a lot of top-notch running backs, and you've got him mentioned in the same breath as Nick Chubb. So why don't you give me reason why you're going with him? Maybe not necessarily as opposed to Nick Chubb, but obviously Nick Chubb, a household name. People know all about him.
Yeah, basically, Georgia's a huge a huge favorite, I should say. If I said they're an underdog. Yeah, wow. Okay, they're 35-point favorites over Vanderbilt this weekend. So, Nick Chubb, he's going to get some carries. They want to make a Heisman push for him, so he's going to get around 150 yards, maybe a touchdown or two, but he's really capped at that level. Not a chance for a huge breakout 200-plus yard game, or at least I don't really see it here. And plus, he's 10.8K on FanDuel. So if you consider that him and Alex Collins are kind of similar in terms of projection, which I think they are this week, Alex Collins, $1,500 cheaper on FanDuel, so you can't really beat that. They're 14-point favorites, I believe. Nope, actually, looking at it, 21-point favorites over Toledo. So not looking for a massive blowout where he's going to get pulled in the first half. Should get more than his 12 carries last week. Actually, I mean, he had 12 carries, 127 yards, and a touchdown last week. So just imagine what he can do with the bulk of the carries, 20 plus. He is the main guy in that Razorbacks offense that loves to run the ball. Split carries with Jonathan Williams last year. Jonathan Williams out for the year this season. So Collins is the guy. He should get around 20 carries in this game as the Razorbacks try to milk the clock in the second half.
Yeah, and certainly, like you mentioned, tons of upside there. Terry Swanson on the Toledo side, 55 on FanDuel, 5,900 on DraftKings. I know you like him as a tournament play with some big upside there.
Yeah, and he's filling in for Kareem Hunt, who was suspended for the first 2 games of the year. And we know Toledo, one of the better running offenses in the nation. Swanson filled in for Hunt last year when he was injured and had some really good games, some 200-plus yard games. Obviously, we're not thinking that'll be the case against Arkansas this week, because Arkansas has a pretty solid overall defense. But Swanson's going to get a lot of carries. He's going to get a lot of swing passes out of the backfield. He's going to have a chance to do something solid. And for 5,500 on FanDuel, I think he at least deserves a look, considering he's going to have a lot of volume this week.
Yeah, I think that's a great call there. And then moving over here to our next play, Patrick Scove, not sure how to say that. $5,900 on FanDuel, $4,400, nice and cheap on DraftKings. Had his 3 touchdowns last week, just 72 yards, but on 12 carries. I mean, 25% of his carries found the end zone there. So as far as value plays go, everybody knows the drill with Georgia Tech here. This is a team that's a run-first offense and has always been, really. So it looks like he's got some big upside for cheap.
Yeah, and I think he's another candidate for multiple touchdowns again. Even though the matchup isn't as good as last week, it's still pretty good. They faced Alcorn State, FCS opponent last week, just basically ran all over them. And now they face Tulane, which not a bad matchup either. I mean, last Thursday you saw Duke offense basically do anything they wanted against Tulane. And I think the same is going to hold true for Georgia Tech this weekend. Scott, he's the B-back, if I'm saying that right, in that triple option wing T attack. We have the H-backs on the side. He's basically the fullback right behind him. So he's going to get those goal line carries. He's going to get those attempts. I'm expecting 10 to 15, and he should just be ripping off big gainers. So, yeah, I like him. He's a value play. Very comfortable second running back in your lineups for both FanDuel and DraftKings.
Yeah, and we know, I mean, tons of guys can get involved in that triple option. It's a beast to defend for anyone as well. So moving over next to a guy who many people might be aware of, Gabe Marks for Washington State. We know the type of volume passing attack that they have. $6,800 on FanDuel, $64 on DraftKings. And this offense was kind of a disappointment last week, but I know that you're of the thinking that this is going to be a change of pace for them compared to the struggles they had last week.
Yeah, and this Washington State-Rutgers game, we should mention, has the highest over-under of this game slate, 66 points. It's in Rutgers, so Washington State traveling across the country. Maybe a little bit concerned there, but they're going to have to be throwing the ball all over the place in this back-and-forth game. I mean, Rutgers, pretty decent passing attack, surprisingly so as well. So this could be a shootout game, a game in the 40s for both teams. So Gabe Marks last week, he looked like their number one guy, alongside the marks of Craig Kraft and other guys like that, Dom Williams in that offense. So it looked like Marks was his primary option for Luke Falk, and I expect that to be the case again. And, there's massive upside within that offense because they're going to throw the ball 50 times a game.
Yeah, absolutely, as they always do. And then you got a guy from UMass here, Tajaye Sharp. And you only like him on FanDuel because obviously DraftKings not carrying this game for this purpose. So why don't you give me your breakdown here on the UMass wide receiver?
Yeah, DraftKings doesn't have the Colorado UMass game in this slate, so you're going to have to find him only on FanDuel. But I think he's probably one of the best wide receivers on FanDuel in this slate. Just considering a matchup, UMass is going to play from behind. They like to throw the ball anyway, and they're just going to throw it even more trying to catch up with Colorado. Colorado not a very good secondary, so all these things really play into his favor. And I'm expecting them to throw it his way at least 15, 17 times in this game. He could get 10 receptions, close to 200 yards, a couple touchdowns. I mean, we've seen that out of him last year. He did that in a few games. So he's only 6,900. And if you compare that with the top wide receivers who are 8K plus, that's a great discount for a guy who has, potential to be the number one overall receiver in this game slate. So I think that's an easy pick for 6,900 on FanDuel in the early slate.
Yeah, seems like a great value with some big upside. DeMarcus Ayers from Houston, another one of these guys here where we've got Devontae Greenberry. Looks like he's an issue there. Is he out, Devontae Greenberry?
He was actually not with the team anymore. He graduated. So
okay.
Ayers is basically stepping up into his place. There was kind of a void there. We didn't know who would step in for Houston to be that receiver, the focal point wide receiver, that is. And after the first game, I know it was against a pretty bad opponent, but, I mean, they got Ayers involved in a lot of ways. He got 10 receptions, a lot of them on short passes, over 100 yards, even had 4 carries on the end arounds, 44 yards in that one. So, I mean, yeah, he's going to get a lot of touches. They're going to need him even more against Louisville. They're probably going to be passing more than usual. So it just makes sense that he's a good value play, just based on volume alone, and maybe he can break one to the house and give you some upside as well. So I really like him. 5,700 on 5,700 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. I like both of those price points as a nice, second wide receiver option. And considering that they throw him a lot of short passes in DraftKings as PPR, I mean, he'll just rack up even more fantasy points over there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for anyone who watched that Michigan-Utah game, you saw that Jake Butt was the lone bright spot for that Michigan offense. He was a tough cover. He's big, he's strong, he's got good hands. $3,700 for him. Almost got to 100 yards last week in that opener. So, I mean, it seems like this is a pretty obvious top play that many people probably will be on as well.
Yeah, I think he makes sense. If you can fit him in, definitely go for it. Actually, try to fit him in before you do any other lineup configurations for the slate. Obviously, tight ends only on FanDuel. We should disclose that.
Yeah.
So DraftKings, a little more of a situation over there, listed as a wide receiver. So you're going to have to kind of play with that, with the price point, with the other wide receivers. But I don't think he's really a bad play over there, all things considered as well, because he's going to get maybe double-digit targets again in this matchup against Oregon State. He caught 8 passes for 96 yards last week. Looked like their clear number one, alongside their wide receiver Amara Darboh, who also, I should mention, is a decent wide receiver play. He went for 8 receptions, 101 yards, and a touchdown last week. Not sure if Michigan's going to be throwing as much this week because, I mean, they maybe won't have to, and I don't think they will want to unless they have to, based on those interceptions last week. But Jake Butt will be heavily involved, and he's basically a wide receiver like Target playing tight end in terms of, just the volume going his way. So I like him in that regard. And if you consider he's only 3,700, I mean, just picture getting a decent wide receiver on FanDuel for 3,700. I mean, you'd jump all over that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So you get him at tight end, you're basically getting another wide receiver in there. I think that's an easy pick.
Great call there. $2,000 Cam Serene from Wake Forest. I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing that last name right.
No, I don't even know either. I just read it and I write it.
Yeah, and that sounds about right, but you nailed this one. He's men's salary. Even had 3 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, so I know that you're very curious why he's even men's salary tonight.
Yeah, I know. That looks more of like a pricing error than anything, because this is a guy who, even last year down the stretch, he was catching a handful of passes for 60 yards or so, seemingly every game down the stretch in ACC play. So the fact that he's minimum salary, I think he's a top 10 overall tight end for minimum salary. If you're not going with Jake Butt and you want to get this guy, the Wake Forest, I'm going to avoid saying his name because I know I'm going to butcher it.
Cam.
Cam. Yeah, Cam from Wake. If you want to take the savings in $1,700 extra dollars and upgrade elsewhere, I think that's a pretty good strategy, hoping he can at least match the production or come close to the production from Jake Butt. And I don't think it's, too much of a leap to assume that could be the case.
Yeah, and that $1,700 can do a lot for you there. So those are your favorite plays each position. You got any other guys you want to throw in at any of these positions here?
I already mentioned Darboh at wide receiver. I really like him. He's 6.5 on FanDuel. Actually, even cheaper on DraftKings, I believe. I don't know have his exact salary in front of me, but I believe it's like 5,300 or something in that range. So I don't mind that at all. Sneaky play at quarterback. You have the Colorado State guy, Stevens, had a great performance last week. Obviously, a tougher opponent in Minnesota, but I'm expecting Colorado State to be throwing it a ton, as they usually do, so he can put up some decent numbers there. He's only 5,900 on FanDuel, similarly priced on DraftKings, so he's another sneaky pick that I like.
Yeah, great call there. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out the rest of our great content. We've got NFL, MLB, all kinds of stuff covered right now at dailyfantasycafe.com.